Historically, pricing and planning have been dealt with as two separate entities, which has resulted in data silos and a lack of joined-up thinking between departments. As such, today on LokadTV, we're going to discuss how software can deal with these tasks in tandem and why the industry should see them as two sides of the same coin. So Johannes, previously we've discussed a little bit about pricing. So what's the angle today?
The angle is the fact that when you think about the demand, obviously if you want to be able to serve clients, you need to anticipate what the future demand will be so that you can produce ahead of time what you intend, produce or source ahead of time what you intend to serve. You can't, I would say, instantly 3D print things on demand, not yet at least. And but obviously, so that's one angle, and the other angle is that obviously demand is strongly influenced by the price. If you have something that is exceedingly expensive, demand is going to be nil, and if you have something that is exceedingly competitive, the demand can be absolutely gigantic on the grand scale. So yet when I started Lokad. There were clearly two camps in terms of software companies. There were the forecasting companies, Lokad was one of them, who really took the problem of analyzing the demand from the predictive perspective. And traditionally, pricing do not even exist. Prices do not even exist. And that's kind of weird, but actually for the first 5 years or so of Lokad, the very notion of prices and pricing was, I would say, absent. It wasn't even part of the roadmap. It wasn't anywhere. Obviously, I knew, like everybody, that prices are a thing that you can see, but there was no specific connection. And then there were other companies who only dealt with pricing optimization, and from their perspective, forecasting and planning were absent. It wasn't even, it wasn't even part of the landscape. They didn't care. Again, they knew that forecasting exists because they watch like the weather forecast on the news, like everybody else. But nonetheless, just like I was, on the forecasting side, I was completely ignoring what was happening as far pricing was concerned. I would say software pricing company were completely ignoring what forecasting was about. And yet, when you think about it, it's profoundly connected through the demand, and demand is super, you need to anticipate, but you need to correctly price as well.
Yeah, and historically you kind of kept those two entities very much separate in kind of Priceforge and Salescast, but then at some point they kind of joined together. So why did you decide to join them?
So that's very interesting. You see, sometimes there are things that are so well established, into the, I would say, the overall thinking of your time that you can't even see it. And when Lokad started to tackle the pricing problem, we had actually a pricing mission. I thought of something that was just completely separate. So we had one product called Salescast, and it was basically the forecasting part of Lokad. And we had another product that was completely distinct, which was Priceforge. And we were selling those two things separately. And actually, even the technologies, the respective technologies were completely separate.
Okay, and then in terms of kind of data analytics, how easy was it to combine the two?
That's a weird thing. We brought those two things, I brought with my team those two apps together. Absolutely not, because I thought, oh, it's the same problem that we're solving, by the way. We're solving it twice. No, that would have been, being very, very smart. But no, we did the very, very dumb thing. We said, oh, this app is using the sales history. This app is also using the sales history. This app needs the catalog with prices. This app also needs the catalog. We don't use the price, but it's pretty much the same thing. It's a catalog. And literally, we were looking at the data, and the data that was needed for, I would say, pricing analytics or for planning analytics, it was essentially the same transactional data that was coming from the same sources, the ERP, the WMS, the e-commerce platform, et cetera, et cetera. So we decided to mutualize the architecture to have like the same, I would say, base layer for data storage and data processing because it was the same data. But at the time, that's the interesting thing, I had not yet even started to conceptually realize that it was literally two sides of the same coin. So we had a first degree of convergence of our technology, but it was completely accidental. Actually, it wasn't accidental, and not completely, because obviously it's precisely because it's the two sides of the same coin that you actually need the same data. But we were taking, the problem from a fairly accidental perspective of just, I would say, data integration problems.
Okay, so it was kind of the data integration and having those two sort of sets of data in the same place was where you kind of started out. But when did the kind of solutions start converging in terms of, well, pricing and the sales?
When we gradually started to realize that the numerical recipes were kind of the same, that was a puzzling thing. And actually, what is now, I would say, what Lokad is nowadays, which is Envision, with a domain-specific programming language dedicated to predictive optimization of supply chain. This thing started on the Priceforge side of things. So that was on the pricing side, where we realized that because at the time, pricing was something very new to us, and thus we didn't really knew how to tackle that. So instead of solving the pricing problem, we say, instead of solving the pricing problem, we're not really sure how to approach that. We are going to solve, I would say, a meta problem, which is how can we come up with numerical recipes faster and in ways that are more reliable. So we say we don't know the recipes yet, but if we can improve, our time to delivery in terms of how much time does it take to, deliver a new numerical recipe that we haven't invented yet to the market, and then how much, if we can improve the time it takes to get this thing running reliably in production, then we will be kind of okay. And so the thinking went into, well, we are going to do that for pricing, because I knew at the time much less about pricing than I did about planning. And yet, when we started to tweak it, we were dealing literally with the same data sets, and we realized, oh, it's very interesting. I mean, what we're doing on the pricing side, it kind of makes a lot of sense for the planning part. And indeed, the supply chains are completely made up of a series of accidents. Some companies have one ERP, some companies have two ERPs, some companies have one ERP per country. Sometimes the e-commerce platform is integrated, sometimes it's separate, sometimes you have a WMS. I mean, it's so heterogeneous. And thus, we started to realize, no, but this kind of completely bespoke programmatic approach that we're doing on the pricing stage gave us, I would say, a second level. I mean, it's something that we should do on the planning stage as well, on the planning side of things as well. And then that gave us a second degree of convergence. We had the same base layer for the data, and now we had the same, I would say, instrumentation, data crunching layers, where it was like the same platform to apply, I would say, the same sort of techniques. But it was literally the same programming language, but I would say the two things were still, run separately.
Okay, but how well does it kind of work? Because what you've kind of described there is maybe a little bit kind of crude. So does it work actually well, or is it more of kind of a rough approximation?
So it took us, so we had, mutualized the data layer, because same data sources. We had mutualized the data crunching approach, where we realized that on both sides we needed to be programmatic. And we were having, distinct set of numerical recipes. And I think the first breakthrough emerged from, I would say, from deep learning, and I would say deep learning era, where we realized that, no, we need to have like literally, we started to play with much more fancy data, I would say, demand models, predictive demand models. And we realized that on the planning side, if you want to have like a very fancy model, you would start to integrate the price. And then on the pricing side, if you want to have a very fancy model, you would start to integrate, I would say, the time effects, such as, for example, the willingness to pay is seasonal. So the willingness to pay, how much are you willing to pay for, I would say, beach, a beach towel? Well, maybe at the end of spring, maybe a lot more than at the very end of summer, because it's just you're ahead of the season. So if you buy the towel now, you will maybe be able to enjoy it for the entire summer. If you buy it at the very end of the summer, well, it's not your use of this product will be much more limited. So willingness to pay, we started to realize that willingness to pay was actually seasonal. But conversely, we started to see that on the planning side is that our more fancy models had, I would say, the pricing dimension was becoming more and more prominent. Why? Because, for example, in fashion, you want to use the price as an instrument, as a lever, to make sure that at the end of the collection, for example, for a fashion brand, you liquidate, your stock entirely. So you see, we had those convergent, and in the middle, we had basically a predictive model of some kind of the demand, and we realized that those models were really converging. I mean, they were converging to the same thing, and basically the loop was looped with, I would say, the differentiable programming area of models where it's literally the same model on both sides of the problem.
Yeah, so which is kind of, you mentioned that kind of the fashion industry. Is that kind of the industry that this is most applicable to? Because if you think about maybe kind of the airline industry, their pricings are fluctuating by the second, and then you've got other industries where the pricing hasn't changed in years. So where is this kind of solution most applicable?
I mean, literally everywhere. I mean, again, it's just that the pricing is always super important. Whenever you're selling something, because it makes a difference between no margin or tons of margin. So obviously, it is always super important. But and the thing is that, and is there a tight relationship between planning, where you're dealing with scarcity, and pricing, where you're dealing with willingness to pay? Yes, the two are actually completely entangled. If you anticipate more demand, you can produce more at a lower price and thus have a better margin and potentially outcompete your competitors on price. And if you have, a super high price, maybe you can play on scarcity and play on the things that makes your product even more desirable. That's what luxury brands are doing. They have very high price. They want pricing to increase over time. And they play on the idea of scarcity, that there is not not necessarily things are not indefinitely available, and they play on that, I would say. And so what differs is that every industry has usually a fairly distinctive perspective on the problem, both on the planning side and on the pricing side. But the fact that those two problems at the core are completely entangled, I believe that it's almost always true. I mean, I'm pretty sure that some people will find out some areas where it's not true, maybe for water distribution or something. But other than that, maybe some I would say some exception. I'm pretty sure that, I mean, my casual observation is that it's nearly always present, and not, I would say, marginally present, like present like the elephant in the room that nobody is seeing.
Okay, so to get the best results, kind of the planning teams need to work very much with kind of the pricing teams. So what?
I would disagree.
Okay.
That was my perspective, my initial perspective. Why should you have a planning team and a pricing team? Why two? That's the exact same mistake that I did initially with Salescast Priceforge. Yes, you have two problems, so you need two teams and you need two pieces of software. And no, that's the same problem. It's just literally you're looking at the same problem from two angles. So the first thing should be there should be one team.
Okay, so if they're one team, then are there any kind of companies that you've observed doing that well and working with it just as one team?
Yes, there is the usual suspect, Amazon. Okay. Where it just happened that they are kind of very smart, and they do things that are very obvious when you think about it. Oh, this thing is running out of stock. Let's raise the price. There is no reason to go at full speed towards the stock out. So literally, the price is just a way to shape the demand so that you make the most of the stock that you have. So and you can literally, it's very funny. I mean, you can literally see Amazon doing that before Christmas with the toys that they're selling. My daughter, 10 years old, is a big fan of Lego toys, and when you look on Amazon, literally every couple of hours, when there is a bit less stock, they will actually bump up the price of certain Lego boxes. And I'm pretty sure they have, it's fairly obvious from what you could see that they have some basic heuristics that basically inflate the price when you're running out of stock. And it makes sense. It's literally common sense. It's not super obvious. So I'm pretty sure that just through public observation that they have something where they have algorithms that just entangle stock availability, which is a projection, with pricing optimization. But then from the Lokad customer base, I see that other very smart, tech-minded, aggressive e-commerce are also already doing that. So it's not just Amazon, it's also the biggest challenges, I would say, in terms of supply chain of Amazon today that are doing that.
Okay, so if this is such a good way forward, then why is the majority of the market still offering software that is just focused on pricing or just focused on planning?
Because as you see, until you have a solution, there is no problem. That's a puzzling thing. You would say, oh, there is a problem, so people should be looking for a solution. But that's not how it works. Nobody is looking for a new way to reinvent the cars if we had anti-gravity engines. We don't. So we don't have anti-gravity engines, so nobody cares about finding solutions for a problem that is not there yet. And the problem is, if you don't have a solution to frontally address pricing and planning, is there even a point in thinking about the potential solution, about this problem, etc.? And I would say no. So, and again, how did Lokad came to that? Did we say, did I think historically, in a stroke of genius, those are two sides of the same coin, I need to address that and to think of those two problems as one? Absolutely not. What I did was pretty much the opposite. We are thinking, well, we have a problem where there is like set of solutions known in the literature for forecasting. There is pricing, and there is again set of solutions known in the literature. So I will actually have one product that implements those solutions, or maybe what I think to be a slightly better variant of those solutions. Same thing on the forecasting side, a slightly better variant of what is known in the literature. And as I was describing, the convergence emerged in a way that was completely accidental. It was just we were using the same data sets. So why not? Let's do it. Let's mutualize that. Then we see that the recipes are a bit alike. So let's mutualize that. So the products, the two distinct software products are brought together just because accidentally they share the same components. But you see, it was not like grand thinking. It was more like accidental development. And then 5 years down the road, you have another accident where with new machine learning techniques, you realize, oh crap, it's the same model that I end up using on the two sides of the problem. And so I have my solution that do the two things together. And thus I realized, no, I should be tackling those problems as one because I have a solution. But you see, now in hindsight, it seems obvious. But looking back, it wasn't. And thus, I think most companies keep their team separate because it's a reasonable thing to do until you have a solution to unify the thing. If you don't have, a solution that can unify pricing and planning, then basically, well, you're stuck having two distinct teams because otherwise those people would not even be able to start working on those two problems. The first thing they would do is to internally resplit the problem. And so they would have people who work on one side of the problem and another set of people who work on the other side of the problem because they don't have, and thus that would become the team of planning and pricing.
Okay, sounds like a bit of a happy accident then. And maybe if we look forward to the future, can you see some of those software companies partnering up and joining together and providing a dual solution?
I don't think so, because literally the sort of things that works to unify the two problems are completely unlike what was traditionally done for pricing and what was traditionally done for forecasting. That's a bizarre thing, that the class of solutions we have now to address those two problems at once, you know, and frontally optimize both prices and the plan, which is basically how much you produce, how much you buy, how much stock you put all across your networks. The sort of technologies that were developed are radically different from what we had historically, either on the pricing side or on the planning side. So literally, we had to entirely scrap and discard our respective technologies on both sides. So imagine, you know, would you actually bring two software companies together so that they can both agree that they are both going to discard their entire tech stack to rewrite everything together? No, I don't think so. That sounds like super weird. So probably what we'll most likely see, I don't know. I mean, it's very hard to forecast, to predict the future, especially the future. But what we'll probably most likely see is new classes of company that from the start leverage this insight to say we are going to address those two problems together, and from day one decide to go for a solution that would encompass the whole spectrum of problems.
Okay, if we start kind of wrapping things up today, kind of what's our main conclusion? Is it kind of that a company which unifies pricing and planning has a lot more control?
No, it's just that, as usual, the companies who have unified that will just, you know, keep pushing, I would say, to bankruptcy companies who don't. You know, it's literally, if you're able to execute that, it's not just more control. It's literally market dominance. And again, when we see it's one more ingredient, we see why is Amazon still gaining market share, although they are like one of the largest company on earth, and they're still winning market share. And same for Alibaba in China, and you see, well, because they have those fundamental things right, and thus they over time it's just, you know, it's just going to crush all the companies that do not. So so why should you do that? Well, I would say just question yourself about, can you really think that you can, you know, in thinking the demand, that you can literally isolate the pricing part from the planning part? Is it reasonable business-wise? And usually when people, you know, stop for a second and think, no, those things are completely entangled. So yes, if I have a solution to just, you know, embrace that, I should do it. And so that my conclusion would be for people watching us is do it.
Okay, always seems to come down to survival of the fittest.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's everything for this week. Thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you again in the next episode. Thanks for watching.